Mental illness is something that affects 1 in 5 Americans and over 18% of the world's population. The history of the treatment and outlook of mental illness has not been pretty, and there continues to be stigma surrounding illnesses so many people struggle with. It is important to discuss the path that allowed the United States to establish the national policy and improving attitudes towards mental health. Beginning in ancient times and continuing all the way into the 17th and 18th century, scientific reasoning was undermined by the idea that a person became sick through demonic possession or as religious punishment. The church was a large social influence and had most of the political power, so the societal outlook on mentally ill was largely based on church's perception of what was causing the problem. This outlook that the mentally ill were being punished for some sort of moral or spiritual failing, the forms of treatment often were more punishment, and the perception of that person and their family was usually quite shameful. One of the earliest forms of treatment was exorcism, completed by a religious figure. Prayers were said over the person's body, and they were often given an elixir of sorts to force the demon out. Another early treatment was triphoning. A small hole was made in an ill individual's skull. The hole would act as an outlet for the evil spirit to leave the person's body. Most people died from this procedure. Others were executed or imprisoned. Those who exhibited behaviors that were deemed out of the ordinary were greatly misunderstood, and many mentally ill were treated very cruelly. In the U.S., many mentally ill were usually treated by family members in their own homes, but by the 18th century, after the first industrial revolution had occurred, populations had grown, areas had become more settled, and people no longer had time to care for their impaired family members. So organizations began to develop institutions for housing and caring for the increased number of mentally ill. These early asylums were less about treatment, though, and more focused on keeping them out of normal society. Many of these asylums were located in basements equipped with shackles on the wall, and many of the people sent to these dungeons had little or no contact with actual caregivers. The first asylum in the United States was created in 1752 by the Quakers in Philadelphia. The facility was located in the basement of the Pennsylvania Hospital. The limited space became overcrowded within 2 years, and a separate psychiatric ward was established next to the hospital. This original facility eventually became the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane in 1856. Asylums used to isolate the patients from society became extremely popular throughout the 18th century. Many of the treatments used in these facilities were extremely inhumane, and the patients were subjected to filthy conditions. In the 1840s, Dorothy Dix, a nurse and activist, saw what was going on in these mental health facilities and became an advocate for the mentally ill. Dix was horrified by the dangerous conditions, underfunded and underregulated systems, and lack of treatment these patients were subjected to. She lobbied for improvement of the mental health system in America, and through her persistence, the first generation of government-funded state psychiatric hospitals were founded, improving the treatment. Although it took many years to make serious changes in these asylums, until the mid-1950s, people were still being subjected to harsh treatments like electroshock and purposeful insulin comas. But in 1954, antipsychotic medications were introduced. These were a huge leap for the treatment of the mentally ill, as they were not only able to help control symptoms, but allowed for the beginnings of deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill. Following the large reform push for less asylum-based treatment and more short-term treatment that improves quality of life, in 1963, Congress passed and John F. Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Centers Construction Act. This allowed for mentally ill to be treated in their own communities by providing federal support for local mental health centers and closing large asylums that had been mistreating patients for too long. By 1994, there were 92% fewer hospitalized. Today, mental health treatment really focuses on improving the quality of life of the individual and providing coping strategies, allowing people to still live within a society and not cooped up in institutions. This deinstitutionalization has not come without its own challenges. Many studies have recognized that most of the homeless population are mentally ill, and that loneliness and poverty are common in mentally ill people. The new treatment of mental health in America is up for debate, but experts say that improvement of community-based systems is the best way to improve the quality of life of the mentally ill in America.